You drive a vehicle every day, but I don't think we ever give a thought to what is making the engine work so reliably. On the same lines, we use UPI every time for almost everything without thinking who or what is making it all work. So I decided to take you all behind the curtains and show you the secrets that make UPI the rook, the elephant on the global chessboard. I will tell you about the huge number of transactions using the UPI and the architecture that lets those many transactions happen, and how it keeps it all so secure for you. I will also tell you the geopolitical implications and why the world is so scared of it now. So please stay with me till the end. I'm also going to break this video into chapters so that you can jump to the section you like. Let's start with the sheer scale. If you think UPI is peaking, the 2025-26 data says otherwise. The government recently reported that in the current financial year, up to December 2025, UPI transactions hit a record value of 230 lakh crore. To put that in perspective, that's nearly double what it was just 3 years ago. The most interesting trend? The average ticket size, or the ATS, is actually dropping. It's now around 1,293 rupees. But I know you will ask me, what the heck is ATS? Let me explain, please. In the world of digital payments, the average ticket size, or the ATS, is essentially price per scan. It's a simple calculation. You take the total value of all the money moved on the platform and divide it by the total number of transactions. For example, if UPI processes 1,000 rupees across 10 transactions, the ATS is 1,000 divided by 10, which gives you 100 rupees as the ATS value. While that sounds like a dry accounting metric, in India's case, the movement of the ATS tells the story of a social revolution. In most businesses, you want your ticket size to go up. You want people to spend more. But for UPI, the fact that the ATS has been gradually dropping, which is now sitting around 1,200 to 1,300, as I said, is actually a massive victory for the government. So now you might ask, why is a falling ATS a win? Well, for 3 reasons. One, it shows about the micropayments. It proves that UPI has conquered the chai and biscuit economy. People aren't just using it for rent or electronics. They're using it for 5 and 10 rupee payments. Then you have the trust. When the ATS is high, it usually means only big players are using the system for large transfers. A low ATS means the common man is using it for everything. And of course, it helps to replace cash. It shows that digital money is successfully killing the physical chiller. The small change. When cash is out of the system, you all know black money also vanishes. To understand it better, you have to look at the 2 types of people using it. First is person to person, or P2P. Think of sending money to your roommate or your mom. The ATS here is usually higher because it would be around 2,500. You know why? Because these are often monthly transfers, rent or splitting a dinner bill. The other is person to merchant, P2M. This is you scanning a QR code at a store. The ATS here is much lower, around 600 to 700 rupees. This is where the real growth is. In 2025, P2M transactions overtook P2P in volume, proving that we've become a nation of scanners. Even though, friends, the average is low, the government is strategically raising the limits for specific things to capture high-value transactions. By allowing an ATS of up to 5 lakhs for hospitals and schools, UPI is trying to eat the lunch of traditional bank transfers. They want the average to stay low for the masses, but for the ceiling to stay high for the big stuff. For a merchant, a low ATS used to be a nightmare with credit cards. If someone bought a 20 rupee pen with a card, the merchant might pay almost 2 rupees in fees, losing 10% of the sale. With UPI's zero MDR, that 20 rupees transaction costs the merchant 0 rupees. This is the fundamental reason why you see a QR code on a vegetable cart, but you'll almost never see a credit card machine there. UPI made the low ticket size transaction profitable for the smallest entrepreneurs in India. Now I use the term zero MDR. What the heck is that? Friends, this is where it gets even more interesting. Zero MDR means zero merchant discount rate. That means the merchant does not pay any fees for using the UPI system. This is the one that makes Western bankers sweat. In the US or Europe, every time you spend a credit card, the shopkeeper loses 2 to 3% of that sale to the bank and the card company. For a small tea seller making a 10 rupee profit, a 3% cut is a big deal. This is why India used the zero MDR policy. The government basically mandated that for standard UPI, the merchant pays 0 fees. It was a bold move, of course. It effectively killed competition from credit cards for daily transactions. Because, for a merchant, why would they pay a 3% fee to Visa when they can get the same money for free via UPI? It turned every local Kirana store into a digital payment hub overnight. But what makes zero MDR possible? After all, the UPI infrastructure is not free to maintain. There is enormous cost to it. Because banks and payment apps like PhonePe or Google Pay and Bheem, they still incur costs to maintain the servers and security. They would lose money under a zero fee model. To prevent the system from collapsing, the government provides an annual subsidy. In the Union Budget 2026, the government allocated 2,000 crore to compensate banks and fintechs for processing low-value Bheem UPI and RuPay debit card transactions. It was done for the compensation. The government typically pays an incentive of about 0.15% for transactions under 2,000 rupees to help the banks cover their operational plumbing costs. While the core bank-to-bank transfer is free, there are now 2 specific areas where merchants do pay fees. One is the wallet-based payments. If a customer pays using a digital wallet like a Paytm or Amazon Pay wallet for an amount above rupees 2,000, the merchant may be charged an interchange fees ranging from 0.5 to 1.1%. Small merchants are usually exempt from this. Then you have the RuPay credit cards. When a customer links their credit card to UPI, the merchant pays an MDR similar to a regular credit card swipe, roughly 1.1 to 2%. So the next question is, how payment apps make money? Since they can't charge for the transaction itself, UPI apps have pivoted to other revenue models. Like they do cross-selling. They use the transaction data to offer you insurance, mutual funds, or personal loans, where they earn a high commission. Yes, your transaction data is used to generate money. Did you know that? Then there are merchant services. For example, they sell sound boxes, the device that announces a payment received. And they charge a monthly subscription fees for them. If you had not noticed, there are convenience fees. You may have noticed apps charging 1 rupee to 3 rupees for mobile recharge or electricity bills. This helps them diversify away from pure transaction revenue. Now, let's get into the secret sauce. Every time a global financial leader visits India, They ask the same question: how on earth did you pull this off? They are used to systems that take days to clear a check, or charge you $5 just to send money to a friend. The answer isn't just we built a cool app. The answer is something called digital public infrastructure, DPI, or as we call it, the India stack. Think of the India stack like the foundation of a house. The government built the plumbing, the electricity, and the walls, and then told the private companies, here you go. Build the furniture and the takeoff. And that created the pillars that make UPI a global heavyweight. First off, forget the idea that UPI is just an app like WhatsApp or Instagram. UPI is a protocol. Think of it like email. You can use Gmail, I can use Outlook, and a third person can use Yahoo. We can still talk to each other because we are all using the same underlying email language. In the old days of digital wallets, if you had money in a wallet A and the shopkeeper had wallet B, you were stuck. UPI fixed that with interoperability. It doesn't matter if you are scanning a QR code with Google Pay, Phone Pay, or Beam. Everyone is speaking the same financial language. This forced the companies to compete on service, not by trapping users in their ecosystem. Now, let's get to the engine of the UPI. For that, please let me explain the technical architecture. To truly understand why UPI doesn't crash even when 700 million transactions are happening a day, we have to look under the hood at the IT architecture and the digital plumbing that keeps it alive. As I said, this isn't just a basic app to bank connection. It's a masterclass in distributed systems and high concurrency design. Let me tell you about its hub and spoke architecture. This is the model managed by the National Payments Corporation of India, NPCI. The spokes are the PSPs like Google Pay or Phone Pay, and the other PSPs are the remitter and beneficiary banks. The NPCI is the hub. It is a central switch. It doesn't store your money. It simply routes the instruction to move it. When you scan a QR, the PSP sends a request to NPCI. The NPCI then talks to your bank, the remitter, to debit the money, and simultaneously talks to the receiver bank, the beneficiary, to credit it. This happens via the APIs, the application programming interfaces, that are standardized across the entire country. One of the genius moves in UPI's design is that the central switch is largely stateless. This means it doesn't need to remember every detail of your life. It just needs to know if the current transaction packet is valid. Normally, when you log into a bank, it is a stateful transaction. It works as long as you're logged in. A stateless design does not need you to stay logged in. Every transaction uses an authentication token without having you to log in at every step. Then we have synchronous and asynchronous processing. For a common man to understand the difference between synchronous and asynchronous, the best way to look at it is through the lens of, waiting versus multitasking. To handle the massive load, UPI uses asynchronous processing, which means it is multitasking. In traditional banking, a transaction might wait for a response at every step, creating a bottleneck. In UPI, the system uses message queues like Kafka. If one bank's server is slightly slow, the message is queued and retried instantly without freezing the entire network. This is how it maintains a sub 2-second response time. Pretty impressive. If a system has to be reliable, it should be available 24/7, right? How does the system stay up during power outages or server failures? Friends, as you would expect, redundancy is baked into multiple levels. Like there are multi-data centers. NPCI operates multiple Tier 4 data centers across India. If the primary data center in Chennai faces a glitch, for example, the traffic is seamlessly routed to the disaster recovery site in Hyderabad, and that happens within milliseconds. It also uses multi-bank switching. Major apps like PhonePe don't link to just one bank. They use multi-bank models. If Axis Bank's servers are down, for example, the app automatically switches the back-end processing to HDFC or ICICI, so your payment doesn't fail. One more interesting thing. You might have seen circuit breakers in your home which trip if the current flow exceeds a certain limit and prevents your house from catching fire. UPI also uses the circuit breaker pattern. If a particular bank server starts failing, like responding with errors 50% of the time, the NPCI trips the circuit. It stops sending the request to that bank for a few minutes to prevent the whole network from slowing down. And the net heals and reconnects once the bank's IT is back online. By the way, this kind of circuit breaker technology is used by all the stock exchanges as well. If there is a very steep market movement, their system stops the trading for a few minutes so that any overreaction does not bring down the markets. Sorry, I digressed with that nugget of information. Okay, so if the system is so robust and available, we can call it reliable only when it is also secure, right? So what about security? Well, we get security without the headache. We've all been there, waiting for a slow SMS OTP to arrive while the delivery guy is standing at the door. It's frustrating. That's why UPI does not depend on OTPs. UPI uses a two-factor authentication system that is incredibly elegant. It relies on something you have and something you know. What do you have? Your specific mobile phone bound to your SIM and device ID. And what do you know? Your 4 or 6 digit UPI PIN. Because the app is bound to your hardware, you don't need to wait for an SMS every single time. You just enter your PIN and boom, it's done in 3 seconds. It's frictionless security. By the way, when you enter your 4 or 6 digit PIN, it doesn't just sit there in plain text. There is on-device encryption. The second you type it, the NPCI Common Library, a secure software layer inside every UPI app, it encrypts your PIN using a high-level algorithm like AES-256. Then the encrypted PIN travels through the network to the hardware security module at your bank. The hardware security module is a physical, a tamper-proof digital vault inside the bank's data center. By law, your bank is the only entity that can decrypt that PIN, and they must do it inside that hardware vault. Even the bank employees or NPCI staff can't see your PIN. And friends, this is why you can't just log into your UPI account on a random phone and start spending. During registration, UPI sends an encrypted SMS that binds your bank account to your specific SIM card and your specific hardware ID. If someone clones your SIM, the hardware ID won't match. If they steal your phone but change the SIM, the binding breaks. You need the original device, the original SIM, and the PIN to move a single rupee. But that is not all. Behind every transaction is a silent security guard powered by AI. The NPCI runs a massive fraud risk management system that analyzes your behavior in milliseconds. For example, if you suddenly try to send 1 lakh rupees to a new VPA at 3 a.m. from a location you've never been to, the system will flag it. It might slow down the transaction or block it entirely until you provide extra verification. And actually, there is more. One of the most important design rules is the zero storage policy. The apps like Google Pay, PhonePe, Paytm, they're all forbidden from storing your UPI PIN or your full bank account number on their servers. Why it matters? Because if a hacker ever breached a major UPI app's database, they wouldn't find a single pin. They would find nothing but tokens that are useless without your physical phone. By combining this heavy-duty hardware security with the plumbing of a national protocol, India has built a system that is as secure as a military vault, but as easy to use as a text message. Friends, as it all grows, you actually need to have a design that does not overwhelm the entire system or the central system. By 2026, the biggest threat to UPI was its own success. The sheer volume of small 5 rupees, 10 rupees transactions was clogging the core banking solutions of traditional banks. To solve this, India introduced UPI Lite. It is an on-device wallet. This is a form of edge computing. Instead of every 5 rupee chai payment going all the way to the bank's mainframe, the transaction is settled locally on your phone's secure vault. The bank's main server only gets a summary update once a day. This cleared up 30% of the traffic noise, making the core architecture faster for bigger transfers. Friends, because of its solid design, UPI also gives India total autonomy. Let me explain. But first, let's stop pretending. We've been living in a world where a couple of giant companies in New York, Visa and MasterCard, they've basically been the unofficial tax collectors of the human race. Every time you buy a coffee, every time you book a flight, they take their 2% to 3% cut. It's the middleman's tax, and for 60 years, it was just the cost of existing in a digital economy. See, the genius and the danger of UPI isn't the app, it's the pipes. In the West, your money travels through a maze of toll booths before it hits the merchant's pocket. UPI said, forget the maze. It's account to account. It's like sending a text message, but the text is money, like $50. It's bank to bank, instant and virtually free. Imagine you are a government in Southeast Asia or Africa. Why would you pay billions in fees to a foreign corporation when you can build a national utility that costs zero? This isn't just competition. It's disintermediation. UPI is making the physical credit card and the massive fees attached to it look like a horse and buggy in a world of Ferraris. But here is the real disruption, and this is where it gets geopolitical. For decades, the global financial system has had an off switch. If a country steps out of line, they get kicked off SWIFT. They lose access to the dollar. But India is now exploring UPI as financial sovereignty in a box. As of 2026, countries from France to UAE to Singapore, they're all linking up. They're building a Plan B network. This is digital diplomacy. India is telling the global south, you don't need their tech, their rules, or their fees to run a modern economy. This is the first real challenge to the Western financial hegemony in our lifetime. And if you think this is just for locals, look at UPI One World. In February 2026, at the AI Impact Summit, we saw delegates from 40 different countries using UPI without even having a local bank account. You land, you load, and you scan. No more getting ripped off at a currency exchange booth. No more, $5 foreign transaction fees on your bank statement. UPI is onboarding the world's tourists to an Indian tech standard. Once a traveler experiences instant zero-fee payments, they go home and ask their own government, why is our system so slow and expensive? As of early 2026, UPI is active or in advanced pilot stages in over 12 countries. Like Singapore linked with PayNow for instant cross-border remittances. In UAE, they started accepting at over 60,000 outlets, including major malls. In France, you can now pay for your ticket at the Eiffel Tower using a UPI QR code. The expansion list? It's getting longer. Bhutan, Nepal, Mauritius, Sri Lanka, Qatar, and now talks are active with Japan and several East Asian nations. Imagine traveling to Dubai or Paris and never having to visit a currency exchange. You just scan the QR code, your Indian bank does the conversion, and the merchant gets paid instantly. That is the future of Global South's financial system. The big question for the next 5 years isn't if the world wants UPI. It's whether the old guard banks will allow it to happen. Because once the 3% tax disappears, it's never coming back. So friends, the miracle isn't that UPI works. It's that it works for everyone, from the billionaire in a penthouse to the farmer in a remote village. Hope you liked it. So please hit that like button and share this video with your family and friends. This is Bharat Leads. Jai Hind.